Welcome back. Today's story is one of pride, power, and a mistake that changed everything. A rich man thought clothes defined worth, so he humiliated Bumpy in public, not knowing he was insulting the wrong person. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I really want to know. And if you appreciate stories built on careful research and true data digging, make sure to subscribe because a lot of real work goes into finding and verifying stories like this. It all started with a public insult, the kind meant to embarrass and establish dominance. Bumpy walked into a high-end gathering wearing simple, worn clothes, nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress. That's when the rich man noticed him. With a loud laugh and a smug smile, he made a comment about Bumpy's outfit, mocking him in front of everyone. The room went quiet for a moment. A few nervous chuckles followed. The insult wasn't just about clothes. It was about status. The rich man wanted to show that money gave him the right to belittle others, to decide who belonged and who didn't. What he didn't realize was that this moment revealed far more about him than Bumpy. While the crowd expected anger or shame, Bumpy didn't react. No raised voice, no defense, just silence, eye contact, and a calm expression that confused everyone watching. Silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. In that single moment, the rich man believed he had won. Believing Bumpy was just another, nobody he could step on without consequences. But that public humiliation planted the seed for everything that followed. The insult was loud, careless, and driven by ego. It would soon become the most expensive sentence the rich man ever spoke. Fully expand Detalis 7 paragraph, no heading keynote 1. The moment unfolded in a room designed to showcase wealth, polished floors, tailored suits, quiet confidence mixed with loud egos. Bumpy entered without ceremony, dressed plainly, almost out of place among the luxury brands and polished appearances. His clothes were clean but modest, the kind that didn't demand attention. That alone was enough to draw eyes. In spaces like this, simplicity is often mistaken for insignificance, and some people feel threatened by anyone who doesn't play the expected role. The rich man noticed him almost immediately. He was used to being admired, used to setting the tone of the room. Seeing someone who didn't try to impress irritated him. With a careless grin, he decided to turn Bumpy into entertainment. His voice carried as he made a sharp remark about Bumpy's clothes, exaggerating the joke just enough to make others hear. It wasn't playful. It was deliberate, meant to establish hierarchy and remind everyone who he believed was superior. Laughter followed, but it wasn't genuine. Some laughed out of discomfort, others out of fear of being next. A few stayed silent, sensing the cruelty in the moment. Public humiliation has a strange power. It pressures the victim to react while rewarding the aggressor with attention. The rich man thrived on that attention. He stood taller, enjoying the control he felt, assuming this moment would pass like all the others before it. Bumpy, however, didn't respond the way people expected. He didn't argue, didn't leave, didn't try to defend himself. He simply looked at the man, calmly, without anger or embarrassment. Quiet response unsettled the room more than any shouting could have. Silence has weight, and Bumpy's silence suggested something deeper. Self-control, patience and awareness far beyond what his appearance suggested. Inside, Bumpy was observing everything. The tone of the insult, the people who laughed, the ones who stayed quiet. Most importantly, the confidence of a man who believed money made him untouchable. Bumpy understood that arrogance often blinds people to their own vulnerabilities. He knew that people who insult publicly usually protect something fragile behind the scenes. The rich man mistook Bumpy's calm for weakness. In his mind, the moment was over. He had asserted dominance and moved on, unaware that he had just revealed his character and his carelessness. He didn't think about consequences because he had never faced any. To him, Bumpy was already forgotten, but for Bumpy, that insult became a reference point. Not a source of anger, but a reminder that respect is often missing where ego is loudest, and that people who humiliate others rarely imagine being held accountable. Single careless moment, spoken out of pride and mockery, quietly set events in motion that the rich man would never see coming. Bumpy's reaction stood in sharp contrast to the noise around him. While the insult still hung in the air, he didn't rush to respond or defend himself. He adjusted his posture slightly, as if nothing of importance had happened. Calm wasn't accidental, it was practiced. People who have endured pressure before learn that reacting emotionally often gives power to the wrong person. Those closest to him noticed it first. His face didn't tighten, his jaw didn't clench, and his eyes didn't drop. Instead, he maintained steady eye contact, not challenging, not submissive, just present. That kind of composure can be unsettling, especially to someone who expects embarrassment or anger. The rich man expected a reaction that would confirm his superiority, but Bumpy refused to give him that satisfaction. Inside, Bumpy was fully aware of what had just happened. He understood the insult for what it was, a performance fueled by ego. Rather than feeling small, he felt clear. Calm gave him space to think, to assess the room, and to recognize the imbalance between perception and reality. He knew that moments like these often reveal more about the aggressor than the target. The silence stretched longer than expected. Conversation stalled. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh again or look away. Bumpy's stillness disrupted the rhythm of the room. Without raising his voice or making a scene, he had quietly taken control of the moment simply by refusing to play his assigned role. To the rich man, this calm looked like surrender. He smirked, assuming the lack of response meant victory. What he failed to understand was that calm is often a sign of confidence, defeat. Bumpy didn't need to prove anything in that moment. He already knew where real power came from. Bumpy turned slightly, rejoining the space as if the insult had never occurred. That small act spoke volumes. He didn't isolate himself or retreat. He stayed grounded and observant, letting the room reset itself. People began to see him differently, not as the man with simple clothes, as the man who couldn't be shaken. That calm reaction became the foundation for everything that followed. It allowed Bumpy to move strategically instead of emotionally. While others measured worth by appearances, he measured opportunity by behavior. And in choosing calm over confrontation, Bumpy positioned himself to respond not with words, with actions that would ultimately redefine the balance of power. The rich man's arrogance wasn't sudden. It was built over years of unchecked success. Wealth had insulated him from consequences, surrounding him with people who agreed, laughed, and stayed quiet when he crossed lines. In his world, money wasn't just comfort, it was authority. He believed it gave him the right to judge, to mock, and to decide who mattered. That belief shaped how he walked into every room, including this one. He measured people quickly and superficially. Expensive watches meant intelligence. Designer suits meant importance. Anything less was dismissed. Bumpy's clothes didn't fit the image he respected, so in his mind, Bumpy didn't deserve respect either. The insult wasn't personal, it was habitual. He had done this before, many times, and had never been challenged for it. What fueled his confidence even more was the audience. He enjoyed performing dominance in front of others, knowing most people wouldn't risk disagreeing with him. Their silence reinforced his behavior. Every laugh, forced or real, confirmed what he already believed, that he was untouchable. Arrogance grows fastest in rooms where no one pushes back. He also underestimated how much he revealed in moments like this. His joke exposed his need to feel superior, his dependence on appearances, and his inability to recognize strength that didn't announce itself. He saw power as something loud and visible, never considering that real influence often operates quietly and patiently. The rich man didn't stop to think about who Bumpy might be beyond the surface. He never asked questions, never looked deeper. That was part of his flaw. He assumed access to money meant access to all relevant information. Anyone outside his circle was irrelevant by default. As the evening continued, he moved on confidently, talking deals, shaking hands, laughing loudly. The insult faded from his attention almost immediately. To him, it was a forgettable moment, just another reminder of his dominance. He didn't realize that forgetting was a privilege. Not everyone had the luxury of moving on so casually. That arrogance became his blind spot. While he celebrated status and surface-level power, he failed to recognize the danger of underestimating someone who observes instead of reacts. His confidence, built on appearances and applause, left him exposed to forces he couldn't see and to consequences he never imagined would come from such a small, careless act. The power dynamics in the room were subtle but unmistakable. Wealth dictated where people stood, who spoke first, and whose opinions carried weight. The rich man naturally occupied the center of attention, surrounded by nodding heads and polite smiles. His confidence came from knowing that most people in that space depended on him in some way, financially, socially, or professionally. Bumpy, on the other hand, stood outside that visible hierarchy. He wasn't competing for approval or influence in the usual ways. His lack of outward status placed him lower in the assumed order. But that assumption was exactly what distorted the reality of the situation. Power was being judged by appearance, by control or capability. What most people missed was how quickly the balance shifted after the insult. The rich man believed power was something you asserted loudly through dominance and humiliation. Bumpy demonstrated a different kind, restraint. By not reacting, he refused to validate the hierarchy the rich man was trying to enforce. Refusal quietly disrupted the structure everyone else accepted. Others in the room sensed it. even if they couldn't explain it. Some began watching Bumpy more closely. Silence, when chosen deliberately, can command attention. While the rich man continued to perform his authority, Bumpy's quiet presence started to feel heavier, more deliberate. Power was no longer flowing in just one direction. The contrast became clearer as time passed. The rich man relied on external validation, laughter, agreement, recognition. Without it, his confidence would weaken. Bumpy needed none of that. His stability came from within, making him less predictable and far more dangerous in long-term situations. This moment revealed how fragile the existing power structure really was. It depended on perception, not substance. Once perception began to shift, even slightly, the entire dynamic was at risk. The rich man didn't notice this shift because he assumed power, once gained, was permanent. Misunderstanding set the stage for what followed. The room still looked the same, but the balance had changed. One man believed he had reinforced his dominance. The other understood exactly where the real leverage lay. From that point on, power was no longer about who spoke the loudest. It was about who saw the full picture first. Behind the calm exterior and modest appearance, Bumpy had something the rich man never suspected: access to information and leverage that most people in the room couldn't even imagine, while others judged value by what they could see. Bumpy understood that real power often lives in spreadsheets, contracts, and quiet obligations buried deep in paperwork. He paid attention to details most people ignored. The rich man's success, though impressive on the surface, was heavily supported by borrowed money. Loans funded expansions, debts backed acquisitions, and obligations were spread across multiple institutions. This wasn't unusual in high-level business, but it created vulnerability. Wealth made the rich man visible. Debt made him dependent. That dependency was invisible to those who only saw luxury and confidence. Bumpy knew how these systems worked. He understood that debt doesn't just represent money owed. It represents control. Whoever holds it sets the terms, decides the pressure points, and determines how much time someone has before everything collapses. While others chased status, Bumpy followed financial trails. Quietly, he began connecting dots. Names of lenders mentioned in passing, projects that seemed profitable but were extended too quickly. Subtle signs of overreach that only someone experienced would notice. None of this required confrontation. It required patience, access, and the ability to wait. The rich man, unaware of any of this, continued operating as if his position was secure. He assumed his influence protected him from risk. That confidence kept him careless. He didn't realize that leverage doesn't announce itself. It waits until the timing is perfect. Bumpy didn't rush. Leverage loses power when used emotionally. Instead, he allowed the situation to mature, knowing that pressure increases naturally over time, compounds. Obligations tighten. What looks manageable one day becomes suffocating the next. What made this leverage so dangerous was that it was entirely legal, entirely quiet, and entirely within the rules of the system the rich man trusted. No public confrontation, no revenge speeches, just strategy, the kind that doesn't need permission or applause. By the time the rich man sensed something was wrong, leverage had already shifted hands. The foundation he stood on was no longer his, and all of it traced back to a moment when he underestimated someone he thought had nothing, never realizing that the most powerful assets are often the ones you can't see. Bumpy didn't just rely on observation. He acted strategically to convert insight into control. Once he understood where the vulnerabilities lay, he quietly moved to acquire the rich man's debts. This wasn't a public announcement, nor did it require confrontation. Every transaction was conducted carefully within the legal and financial frameworks already in place, making it nearly invisible to outsiders. By purchasing these debts, Bumpy gained a form of authority that went far beyond money. Isn't just a number. It's a tool of influence. Whoever holds it can dictate terms, enforce deadlines, influence decisions without needing to appear aggressive. It's the quiet power behind the scenes, and Bumpy had now stepped into that position. The process required patience. He didn't rush to take full control immediately. Instead, he allowed the rich man to continue his operations, unaware that each move he made was now being watched and constrained by someone else. This slow, deliberate acquisition ensured that Bumpy maintained the upper hand without tipping his hand. What made Bumpy's strategy brilliant was the combination of subtlety and leverage. While the rich man flaunted wealth and influence, he had no idea that each decision was now being affected by the very person he had humiliated. Every financial misstep, every rushed investment played into Bumpy's growing control. Bumpy also ensured he maintained discretion among lenders and stakeholders. If anyone suspected his intentions, the rich man could have attempted to restructure or protect his position. Keeping the operations quiet, Bumpy eliminated the chance of interference, letting the debt naturally shift power without a fight. As time passed, the rich man began to feel pressure he couldn't explain. Deals that had seemed secure now faced complications. Credit lines tightened unexpectedly. Vendors and partners asked questions that made him uneasy. The foundations of his wealth were still intact, but his freedom to operate was quietly shrinking. Ultimately, this acquisition of debt was a masterclass in strategy. Bumpy didn't need a dramatic confrontation or public exposure. He turned what the rich man had always considered a minor annoyance, a slight insult over clothes, into a leverage point that allowed him to control decisions, influence actions, and quietly move toward full authority, all while remaining calm, invisible, and entirely calculated. Bumpy's preparation was methodical and deliberate, built on patience and careful observation. He didn't rush into decisions or act on impulse. Every move he made was calculated, designed to maximize leverage while minimizing risk. Unlike the rich man, who relied on arrogance and appearances, Bumpy relied on foresight and information. He began by mapping out the rich man's financial ecosystem. Who were the creditors? Which obligations were most pressing? Which assets were overextended? Every detail mattered. This research wasn't visible to outsiders. It happened quietly in the background, often unnoticed by those who assumed status alone equaled security. Bumpy also anticipated potential obstacles. He considered how the rich man might respond if he discovered what was happening. He planned contingencies, ensuring that every action had a fallback. This level of preparation meant that he could act decisively when the right moment arrived, without panic or hesitation. The strategy wasn't just financial, it was psychological. Bumpy observed how the rich man reacted under pressure, how he managed pride, and how he treated those he considered beneath him. These behavioral patterns revealed weaknesses that could be exploited subtly without ever needing confrontation. Bumpy also cultivated relationships quietly. He made connections with lenders, financial advisors, and other stakeholders, ensuring that when the time came, he had allies who could act quickly and discreetly. Each relationship was nurtured carefully, never forcing loyalty, but ensuring that trust and respect were built on competence and discretion. During this period of preparation, Bumpy maintained his outward calm and modest appearance. To the outside world, he seemed unchanged, unremarkable, even. This invisibility was crucial. The rich man continued to underestimate him, assuming that someone dressed simply and silent in demeanor could never pose a threat. By the time Bumpy was ready to act, every piece was in place. The groundwork, the relationships, the understanding of vulnerabilities, and the subtle positioning of influence all converged. His preparation allowed him to move with precision, turning what had once been a single insult into the foundation of complete control, all executed without unnecessary noise or drama. Once Bumpy had carefully prepared, the shift in control began, subtle at first, almost imperceptible to anyone watching. The rich man still acted as if he was in charge, attending meetings, signing deals, and maintaining the appearance of authority. But the reality behind the scenes was already changing. Bumpy's strategic positioning meant that decisions he once made freely were now influenced quietly by someone he had dismissed. Every financial decision, every contract, and every negotiation began to fall under Bumpy's indirect supervision. The rich man didn't realize that the terms he agreed to were being subtly steered. Vendors and creditors started communicating in ways that constrained his options, all without confrontation or overt threats. It was a shift so discreet that it looked like normal business operations, yet it steadily tightened Bumpy's control. Bumpy also leveraged timing to maximize his influence. He knew when to act and when to wait, ensuring that the rich man felt confident while being quietly guided into positions that favored Bumpy. By allowing the rich man to continue his routine, he created a false sense of security, making the eventual takeover appear natural and almost inevitable. The psychological aspect of control was equally important. Bumpy's calm demeanor and patience unnerved those around the rich man. Staff and associates began noticing subtle inconsistencies in his authority. Decisions that once felt unilateral now required extra approvals or faced delays, causing frustration and confusion. The rich man's apparent confidence masked the reality his influence was eroding. Bumpy's quiet control also involved communication with external stakeholders. He positioned himself as a trusted party in negotiations without revealing his full intentions. Lenders, advisors, and partners began consulting him, often unaware of his ultimate goals. By embedding himself into these networks, Bumpy created dependencies that strengthened his influence while the rich man remained oblivious. As time passed, the rich man's mistakes, once minor, became amplified under the subtle pressure Bumpy exerted. Each misstep reinforced Bumpy's growing control. Decisions that previously seemed straightforward now carried hidden consequences. Slowly, the rich man's freedom to act independently shrank, even though publicly he appeared unchallenged. Ultimately, this shift in control was complete before the rich man fully realized it. Bumpy's patience, preparation, and strategic insight had allowed him to seize authority quietly, invisibly, and effectively. What began as a simple insult had evolved into a complete reversal of power, with Bumpy now pulling strings from behind the scenes while maintaining the appearance of restraint and composure. The public downfall of the rich man began quietly, almost imperceptibly. It gained momentum as the effects of Bumpy's strategic control became impossible to ignore. Initially, only subtle signs indicated that something was wrong: missed deadlines, delayed payments, small errors in operations that previously ran smoothly. To outsiders, these seemed like minor setbacks, but to the rich man, they were the first cracks in the armor of his confidence. As Bumpy's influence grew, the rich man started losing the trust of those around him. Partners and associates began questioning his judgment. Projects that had seemed secure began encountering unexpected obstacles. Each failed deal or delay, though seemingly isolated, was part of a pattern that pointed back to the unseen hand guiding events. The rich man's ability to act independently was being steadily eroded. Rumors and whispers began to circulate. While nothing was explicitly said about Bumpy's involvement, people started noticing inconsistencies in the rich man's management. Stakeholders who had once relied on him began exercising caution. The social perception of his authority began to waver. Influence, once unchallenged, was slipping quietly out of his grasp. The rich man tried to compensate with aggression and visible control. Loud meetings, emphatic gestures, and public declarations of authority. These gestures only highlighted the growing gap between appearance and reality. He looked powerful, but in substance, his decisions were increasingly constrained. Every attempt to assert dominance was met with practical resistance, often invisible to him but guided by Bumpy's quiet orchestration. As failures accumulated, financial consequences became unavoidable. Contracts were renegotiated, obligations tightened, and key assets became vulnerable. Creditors and partners began to act with caution, sometimes withholding cooperation until conditions were clarified. The rich man's once comfortable empire now operated under uncertainty, and he was unaware that the instability was the result of a carefully planned strategy, not chance. Public perception started to change as well. News of delays, failed ventures, or financial difficulties began circulating. Even those who had once admired or feared him now began to doubt his competence. The rich man's reputation, built over years of apparent dominance, started to crumble. A collapse that had begun with a single careless insult and was amplified by unseen strategic moves. By the time the rich man recognized the scale of his decline, it was too late to recover. The mechanisms of control were fully in Bumpy's hands, and every effort to regain authority only reinforced the shift. What had begun as a minor public humiliation now culminated in a full reversal of fortune, demonstrating how quiet, calculated power can completely dismantle even the most confident and arrogant of figures. The rich man's loss of assets was both swift and absolute once Bumpy's strategic control reached its tipping point. It began with key financial positions being quietly consolidated under Bumpy's influence, leaving the rich man with diminishing access to the funds and resources that had once defined his power. What had seemed secure investments, property, and business holdings suddenly became vulnerable to subtle legal and financial maneuvers that the rich man couldn't counter. As obligations matured, payments due and debts began to demand attention that he no longer fully controlled. The creditors, who had been quietly guided by Bumpy, enforced agreements with precision, taking advantage of loopholes and terms that the rich man had overlooked. This created immediate pressure, forcing him to liquidate certain assets just to meet obligations, further accelerating his financial decline. Simultaneously, projects that were once profitable began to falter under the weight of operational constraints. Suppliers, contractors, and partners began requiring stricter compliance and assurances, all orchestrated indirectly by Bumpy. The rich man's attempts to maintain control over these ventures only exposed gaps in his authority, making his empire increasingly unstable. Bumpy's approach ensured that the losses were comprehensive, not just isolated to one area. Multiple assets, including businesses, properties, and even personal investments, were gradually absorbed or influenced through debt leverage and strategic positioning. By the time the rich man realized the breadth of his losses, it was clear that the foundation of his wealth had been quietly dismantled. The psychological impact of losing tangible assets compounded the financial strain. The rich man, who had always equated wealth with status, faced growing anxiety as public perception shifted. Luxury assets no longer symbolized dominance, they became reminders of vulnerability. The more he clung to appearances, the more exposed he became to the unseen mechanisms that Bumpy had carefully put in motion. Even attempts to reclaim or protect assets were thwarted by timing and precision. Bumpy had anticipated potential counteractions and had already placed safeguards that made reversal difficult. Every negotiation, every legal step the rich man attempted, was subtly constrained by Bumpy's prior arrangements, turning reactive efforts into further losses. Ultimately, the complete erosion of his assets marked a full reversal of fortune. What began as a single insult over clothes had escalated into the total dismantling of his financial empire. Bumpy, with patience, strategy, and leverage, transformed humiliation into dominance, leaving the rich man not only financially weakened but also entirely dependent on the very person he had once thought insignificant. The rich man's reputation, once untouchable, began crumbling alongside his financial empire. In high society and business circles, perception is everything. Rumors of missed payments, delayed projects, and financial mismanagement began circulating quietly at first, then grew louder as stakeholders, partners, and competitors noticed inconsistencies. What had seemed like a minor inconvenience to him now threatened the very image he had built over decades. Clients and partners who once sought his approval started questioning his judgment. Invitations to elite gatherings became scarce. Opportunities to influence major deals diminished. People who had once deferred to his authority began keeping their distance or consulting others before making decisions. The aura of dominance that money had provided was fading fast. The rich man's public persona was equally vulnerable. Those who had once admired his confidence and swagger now whispered about vulnerability and instability. Every public appearance or deal that faltered added fuel to the perception that he was no longer in control. Even casual observers began to doubt the strength of his empire, and in circles where influence depends on perceived power, spreads faster than facts. The psychological impact on the rich man was severe. He had always equated respect with wealth. Now the wealth that commanded respect was slipping away. With each failed venture and each unexpected complication, his credibility weakened and anxiety began to affect his decision-making. Panic and overreaction crept in where confidence had once been, further accelerating his downfall. Bumpy's calculated approach amplified this reputational erosion. By acting quietly, he ensured that the rich man appeared to be failing on his own without overt interference. The humiliation was subtle but undeniable. People began to see the rich man as fallible, and in circles built on perceived invincibility, that perception was devastating. Media and public attention, when it eventually noticed, magnified the losses. Headlines or social commentary on financial missteps highlighted a man who had once seemed untouchable, making his decline a cautionary tale for others. Reputation, once established over decades, was undone in months, all without Bumpy ever needing to directly attack it. By the time the rich man understood the extent of the damage to his reputation, the shift in perception was irreversible. Colleagues, partners, and the wider public now saw him as vulnerable, dependent, and fallible. The humiliation that had begun with a single insult over clothes had evolved into a complete collapse of both influence and credibility, leaving him isolated and powerless while Bumpy quietly commanded the respect and authority he had once arrogantly mocked. The ultimate lesson from this story revolves around respect, strategy, and the hidden nature of real power. Bumpy's rise wasn't built on aggression or public displays. It was built on observation, patience, and careful planning. The rich man had dismissed him for superficial reasons: clothes, appearance, perceived status, ignoring the deeper truth that influence and authority are rarely earned through arrogance alone. Respect, as Bumpy demonstrated, is not demanded. It is earned through competence, foresight, and control. By remaining calm under insult, he established a presence that was measured and deliberate. People began to notice that his power was not loud or flashy, but precise, strategic, and effective. This quiet authority contrasted sharply with the rich man's showy dominance, highlighting the difference between perception and substance. The story also illustrates the dangers of underestimating others. The rich man assumed that someone with modest clothes and quiet demeanor lacked the ability to challenge him. Assumption blinded him to vulnerabilities in his own position, allowing Bumpy to exploit weaknesses that were invisible to anyone focused solely on status and appearances. Another critical lesson is the value of preparation. Bumpy's actions were never impulsive. Each move was calculated, timed, supported by research. He mapped out the rich man's weaknesses, acquired leverage quietly, and waited for the perfect moment to act. This demonstrates that true power often comes from strategy and patience rather than immediate confrontation or emotional reaction. Leverage is another key theme. Bumpy understood the power of financial obligations, legal rights, and relationships, using these to influence outcomes without ever creating direct conflict. Control doesn't always require force. It can be exercised subtly, quietly, and effectively, something the rich man failed to grasp until it was too late. The story also highlights the interconnectedness of reputation, wealth, and influence. Losing respect in one area inevitably affects the others, as the rich man's financial position weakened under Bumpy's guidance. His public and private reputation followed. The lesson is clear. Arrogance and superficial judgments can lead to the collapse of what was once thought unshakable. Finally, the ultimate takeaway is that small actions can have enormous consequences. A single careless insult over clothes triggered a chain of events that led to the total reversal of fortune. It's a reminder that underestimating others, overvaluing appearances, and ignoring the subtleties of power can have devastating consequences, and that respect, strategy, and patience are the true foundations of lasting influence.